Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the BDMMA channel. This will be Khamzat v. Diaz Part 2, the striking edition, and I felt like it was a pretty good opportunity to address something I've wanted to talk about for a little bit now, which is essentially a street fighting theory. As much as that is kind of a lame term, rarely are fights in a street. But someone with that maybe grew up in a neighborhood where there were fist fights is a more broad brush to use to explain the theory. Now, when it comes to someone like Nate Diaz, when he goes against pro strikers, say Conor in their first fight, Anthony Pettis, Michael Johnson to some extent, oftentimes he gets the better of them, not so much by overwhelming pressure. Those certainly matter a ton. His length helps, his endurance helps, of course, but he throws punches from very odd angles, like what I often speak to, like trajectory of the strike. So like a 2-4 hybrid, for example, you want your rear hand straight to be straight without much of a tell. Usually your boxing coach will tell you not to flare your elbows a little as you get a little more advanced. There's a time and place for that. But a 2-4 hybrid will kind of be like a cross with a hook on it, where your hand's loose and you kind of pull in with your shoulder and add a little extra with your hip at the last second. If that makes sense, or if you can picture it, perfect. Now, Masvidal is a great example of someone who provably fought, in bare knuckle type street fights, for, again, lack of a better term, and did well in that capacity, and also did very well against Diaz. There was one exchange where commentary made it sound like a little more than it was, where Nate caught Georgie a little bit, but for the most part, George has had enough experience with people that are just tough, that are street ready and tough, to be. He was, in other words, he was prepared. He had seen it enough to counter it, and/or have a game plan prior to it. And he also knew the importance of the psychological game, to kind of not play it until you do, because leading up to a fight, sometimes it's almost a grave digging process. Rather than during the fight, letting you talk all you want. Once the bell rings, it doesn't really matter. But why put that added stress on yourself, which I think hurt Khamzat somewhat against Dorman in his last fight. Just the bravado, or whatever you want to call it, the chesty, the fortitude, the kind of dick measuring competition that's so inherent to fighting, really. With that said, Khamzat is very professional, and there's some things he did very well versus Burns. Mostly when he stayed at length that was his. Now, once Khamzat realizes he doesn't need to switch stance all the time, he certainly doesn't need to lead with his right foot because of wrestling, because his defense suffers there. But when he stays long from orthodox and switches occasionally to southpaw, it can be extremely effective. The right hand into the switch stance into that right hand jab from distance that knocked Gill down to the ground, that was a good example of him taking advantage of his distance. But there were a few other times where he was kind of corralling him to the fence to throw these beautiful combinations, but one thing that he lacked was like moving his head with his strikes, like on the way in. Head movement's great from a distance, but it's much better amidst the combination. And the other thing is, like, he's got to roll with the momentum of things feet-wise. So he takes his feet with him too much, especially against the fence. That's why things like check hooks and that right hand that really rocked him landed, because his feet weren't in a position to be multi-directional or multifaceted. They were kind of staying equidistant the whole time. So like he'd overcommit with his right foot on a right hand when maybe he shouldn't have. That way he can play with the distance, him being normally the taller person at 170. With Diaz, I think they're going to be around the same height. He might be a little longer, but he's more athletic, so he could still pull off that spearing long jab. that you'd see from like Izzy versus, say, Paulo Costa. That's a good example of that distance spear jab where your front foot or left foot, if it's orthodox, is going to kind of squash the bug, if you will, on your toes and push you back. Or, of course, you can keep the momentum forward without staying in the center line. What worries me is he backs up straight, and that's like kind of a 101 thing to stop doing. John Jones does it and has gotten away with it, so I guess it's not the end of the world, but you really want to back up at an angle, or at least back up straight and then create one, to not be sitting there like a sitting duck, because that's when he seemed to kind of get tagged versus Dorino. With Diaz, when he seems to pull off these fights that people don't have him to win, or people aren't picking him to win, like Conor the first fight, that was a matter of timing, really, more than anything. And I think it was twofold in that Conor did kind of the thing I spoke of earlier, which is put so much pressure on oneself that afterward, if you're not putting somebody away and you're landing clean, it can be deflating, and it can also start to kind of wear on or be taxing on your lungs, or on your cardio or your energy, however you want to put it. And getting hurt will do that as well as anything. So most that understand fighting enough to know the difference between someone like wrestling out of necessity versus wrestling out of offensive preference. In that fight, Diaz finished via submission, but realistically he hurt Conor standing, and then it was a bad shot, and the rest was kind of knife through butter jiu-jitsu at that point. But what I see positive in Khamzat is he's got time to develop more. He shows really good ideas, combinatory ideas as far as combinations. He's got a great low calf kick, which against Diaz is a killer, and I feel like his is just, it's way more powerful than anyone that's really hit Nick with it, or Nate rather, in the past. And I think if he stays at length and kind of mixes in level changes just enough to kind of touch his knee, I think the things you need to watch for are Khamzat's angular sense, his ability to move off center line, both offensively and defensively, and if he's using his jab, I think he'll be smart to jab, low kick, kind of spam both of them, level change, even if it's just touch a knee and back off, kind of get a read on it. But just all he's got to do is get his hands clasped, and I really think it'll be a grappling exhibition from there, if indeed that happens. I don't know what the game plan is, but I do think Diaz is most dangerous standing because of the awkwardness of his strikes, and he does have great timing on his 1-2. What he does is that, and I've covered it a million times, but that kind of that double tap where it's like bop, so he'll go 1-2, 1-2, 1-2, and that's the time of it. Jab cross, then I'll go jab cross, where he just layers it right on there. And that's how he got Conor. Conor was doing like a pull 6. Again, he said prior to the fight that that's what he saw landing as the finishing punch, and he kind of forced it. And Diaz isn't as dumb as some people think he is, and he ended up capitalizing on that. So he threw the 2 as Conor was trying to do a pull 6, meaning his jaw was coming right back into the picture and getting cracked to the left hand. It wasn't even so much how hard the actual punch was, it was placement and timing. And anyone that gets caught like that by a guy like Diaz, especially if it's a fight that drags on a little bit longer, could be in trouble. So I think it could be a little bit interesting on the feet. It could be a little bit of a chess match, but I think Khamzat needs to really learn to kind of move his head with his punches. I'll include a clip of Roy Jones shadow boxing to show you what I mean, because this way he can kind of work on it even when he's not just hitting pads, because I really don't know his striking coaches well enough to speak for them. But he wouldn't be the first guy coming with a big fight coming up to watch my channel and maybe get some pointers. So if Diaz is watching, he's just got to be gritty and try to stay at distance as well, and throw said strikes from his normal trajectories. I wouldn't fix a thing. I would just be as Nate Diaz can be. And so those are all opinions. I'll try to match up some video to this. Just some things to watch for are Khamzat from distance, Khamzat from orthodox, Khamzat from southpaw, the differences there offensively and defensively, and also how he overcommits sometimes to distance when he really shouldn't. And that's about all I got. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. Links to my Patreon, etc., will be in the description, and that's all I got. So, I'll see you on the flip side. Cheers.